She stood at the back of the courtroom. No nameplate, no microphone, no apology, only eyes on her, watching, calculating, waiting for her to break. She didn't. Instead, she reached into her coat and placed a queen piece on the table. Upright, steady, silent. Across the room, Brandon Carter didn't blink, but his smile was gone. They thought she was still grieving, still fragile, still that wife who once stood beside him, believing in vows that were never real. But she wasn't here to mourn. She was here to remind them what happens when the woman they tried to erase comes back with the truth in one hand and their secrets in the other. Because this wasn't revenge. It was a vow to uncover every lie, to finish what her father started, to burn the name they tarnished, and rebuild it in her own fire. Emily Carter was born into legacy, not wealth alone, but heritage. Her parents, Thomas and Margaret Whitaker, were icons of their generation, founders of Whitaker Global, a clean energy company that began in a garage and grew into a billion-dollar empire. But what truly made them legendary wasn't their fortune. It was their integrity. Their name stood for something, and Emily had been raised like an heir to a crown carved in stone. She attended the best schools, rode horseback before she could read, learned how to negotiate over chessboards with her father, and how to silence a room with poise from her mother. She wasn't loud, but she was magnetic. She didn't need to dominate conversations. She ended them with one well-placed sentence. But beneath that grace was a girl who had never known a world without expectations. She was taught that control was safety, that vulnerability was a risk they couldn't afford. She learned early how to smile without giving herself away, how to recognize hunger behind someone's charm, and how to love from a distance, politely, invisibly, strategically. Still, there was something soft in her, something untouched. That softness is what made her fall for Brandon Carter. He was everything her world warned her about. Charming, ambitious, unpredictable. But he was also the only man who ever looked at her and saw a woman, not a symbol. He didn't come from legacy. He came from power. The Carters were cutthroat real estate moguls, known for swallowing up small cities and spitting out glass towers. The marriage wasn't approved. It was tolerated. Emily thought she could be the bridge between two worlds, her parents' dignity and Brandon's hunger. She believed in love, believed in compromise, believed naively that with enough grace and strength, she could shape a future that honored both. For the first year, she tried. She showed up to boardrooms, smiled at Brandon's associates, kept her name off the headlines even as her face appeared in them. She folded into the role of perfect wife like it was just another suit to wear. But Brandon didn't want a partner. He wanted a prop. Someone elegant to display. Someone silent when necessary. Someone loyal, above all else. Even when the loyalty was one-sided. When her parents died in a car crash just 2 years after the wedding, everything changed. The grief was overwhelming. But even worse was how quickly Brandon took control of the estate, of the company, of the narrative. The Whitaker name became a brand, restructured, rebranded, and then erased. He used Emily's signature on contracts she never read, put her in front of cameras to announce joint decisions she never made. And when she began to question the accounting discrepancies, the unusual offshore deals, the unexplained loss of control over her own holdings, he made her the problem. That's when the accusations started. Wire fraud, insider trading, breach of fiduciary duty, filed anonymously, whispered publicly, and all pointing back to her. It wasn't just betrayal, it was orchestration. He framed her, and the board, filled with allies of the Carter family, voted her out of her own company. She disappeared 2 weeks later. No statement, no lawsuit, no defense. The world assumed guilt, and Brandon never corrected the narrative. He remarried, quickly, to a young influencer, posted curated pictures of a fresh start, spoke of redemption and new beginnings and learning from the past. He never once mentioned her name again. But Emily hadn't disappeared. She had gone underground, gathering, watching, listening. For nearly a year, she rebuilt herself in shadows. Not to survive, to return. Not as Brandon Carter's wife, as the storm he never saw coming. The first time Emily Carter saw her face again was in the window of a department store. She had been walking through downtown Boston, dressed in black, invisible under a wide-brimmed hat and sunglasses, her movements careful, her posture slightly smaller than it had once been. She wasn't ready to be seen. Not yet. But she wanted to feel the city again. Its rhythm, its pulse, its hunger. And then, in the reflection between mannequins and autumn jackets, she saw her. Not the woman she was now, the woman she used to be. Perfect hair, tailored coat, diamond ring, standing beside Brandon Carter on a billboard advertising the Carter Initiative's newest luxury development. Elevate, inspire, rebuild. Emily froze. Her name wasn't mentioned, only his vision, his dream, his empire. But her face, smiling, polished, oblivious, was still part of the image. A ghost, trapped in a life she no longer owned. The most humiliating part wasn't the betrayal. It was how easily the world moved on without her, how seamless her erasure had been. A week later, it got worse. Emily was at a quiet coffee shop tucked inside a used bookstore, one of the few places she still felt human. She was sipping tea, rereading a legal memo she had drafted for a firm that didn't know her real name, when a familiar voice echoed behind her. She probably did it, though. No one drops off the face of the earth unless they're guilty. It was a woman, polished, loud, wearing a Carter Foundation pin. Another woman nodded. And honestly, I heard she forged documents, stole from her own family. I mean, it's sad, but Brandon came out of it so well. Look at how much he's done for the community since. Emily sat still, didn't turn around, didn't speak, but something inside her broke, not like glass shattering, but like ice cracking beneath pressure. Slow, loud, inevitable. Later that week, she returned to her storage unit, the one place she kept pieces of her old life. Inside, boxes of files, receipts, statements, copies of contracts, and her wedding dress, still zipped inside its plastic, like a relic of a different woman. She took the dress out, laid it on the floor, and stared at it for a long time. Then, without flinching, she took a pair of scissors and began to cut. Not delicately, not symbolically, but with finality. When she was done, she picked up the phone and called the only person she had ever feared trusting, Detective Aaron Blake. They had crossed paths once, briefly, during a board investigation into a failed acquisition involving Whitaker Global. He had seemed too observant, too calm. He had asked questions Brandon hadn't liked, and he had disappeared from the case soon after. But Emily had never forgotten the way he looked at her, like he saw more than a headline. She left him a message. "My name is Emily Carter. I need 10 minutes of your time. I think you know why." 3 hours later, he replied, "Tomorrow, noon, my office, and bring whatever you haven't already burned." That was the beginning of everything. Detective Aaron Blake's office wasn't what Emily expected. She thought it would be sterile, beige walls, stacks of manila folders, and the faint scent of burnt coffee. Instead, it was almost curated. Warm wood, clean lines, framed black and white photos of city skylines, a single plant near the window, barely alive but still defiant. Aaron himself fit the space perfectly. Pressed shirt, rolled sleeves, silver at his temples that somehow made him look sharper, not older. His eyes were still the same, steady, assessing, impossible to interrupt. He didn't greet her with pleasantries. He gestured to the seat across from his desk. "You're late." Emily sat. "You expected me to show up? I expected you'd run again." "I'm done running." He studied her. "You're not here for safety." "No, you're here for war." She placed a flash drive on the table. "That's a start." The environment wasn't a courtroom, but it might as well have been. Every word felt weighted, every pause loaded. Emily could feel her own pulse in her throat, but she kept her voice even, her back straight. She explained everything, from the manipulation of the Whitaker board to Brandon's sudden control of her family's trust, the anonymous allegations, the board's vote, the smear campaign, her forced disappearance, and now, the trail of silent money. Brandon was quietly shifting offshore under the Carter Foundation's philanthropic facade. Aaron didn't interrupt once. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair. "You've done your homework. I lived it. Not enough to win in court. Not yet. I don't want to win in court," she said. "I want to expose them." His eyebrow lifted slightly. "You don't want justice? I want blood first." He smiled, not amused, but impressed. She didn't smile back. He stood, walked to a cabinet, pulled out a folder. opened it. Inside were surveillance photos of Brandon, of Carter Foundation board members, of a woman Emily didn't recognize. Aaron flipped the folder toward her. "I've been tracking them for 2 years," he said, "but I couldn't get close until you called." Emily frowned. "Why?" "Because I needed someone on the inside." She met his gaze. "I'm not on the inside anymore." "You will be. You will be." The words settled between them like a loaded weapon. That was the beginning of their collaboration. Aaron helped her secure new legal counsel. Not high profile, not flashy, but surgical. He introduced her to 2 investigative journalists from a non-profit media outlet obsessed with corporate corruption. And he opened doors she didn't know existed. Back channels, whistleblower protocols, discreet contacts in financial crime units. But the center of their world, the one they needed to re-enter, was still the Carter Foundation. Headquartered in a 20-story building in Manhattan's Upper West Side, the Carter Foundation was the gleaming symbol of Brandon's public redemption arc. Marble floors, art installations, weekly charity galas, an army of PR agents that polished his image until it sparkled. Emily walked through those doors again 5 weeks later. Not as a guest, not as a wife, as a consultant, under her mother's maiden name. Hired by an affiliated philanthropic firm, Aaron had quietly arranged to embed her through. The lobby receptionist didn't recognize her, but the head of PR did. "Ms. Whitaker," she said, voice tight. "We weren't expecting—" Emily cut her off. "That's the point." Her office was temporary, windowless, but it gave her access to emails, to internal schedules, to board meetings, to rooms she had once entered as decoration. Now, as a weapon, she moved quietly, spoke less than necessary, smiled just enough. And every time Brandon passed her in the hallway without recognizing her, she remembered exactly why she was there. There was no shortage of enemies inside the Carter Foundation. Some wore designer suits and delivered rehearsed smiles. Others lurked in whispers and strategic silences. But the real threats were the ones who had been there all along, those who had watched Emily fall and clapped quietly as she hit the ground. The first was Victoria Hale, the Foundation's chief operating officer. Polished, efficient, and terrifyingly elegant, Victoria had been Brandon's trusted second-in-command for years. Rumors circulated about their relationship. Too many late-night meetings, too many photos cropped at the shoulder. But Emily didn't care about rumors anymore. What mattered was that Victoria now controlled everything Emily once did. Access to the board, influence over major donors, oversight of strategic initiatives. And Victoria recognized her. Not by name, not immediately. But on the 3rd day of Emily's return under her alias, Victoria stopped her in the hallway. "You seem familiar," she said, voice smooth, eyes calculating. "Where did you say you worked before?" "I didn't," Emily replied with a smile. Victoria held her gaze a second too long, then nodded and walked away. From that moment on, Emily felt the surveillance. Not cameras, people. Assistants who took longer to deliver files. Interns who watched her from across the break room. Meetings that suddenly moved without explanation. She was being watched. And she wasn't the only one who noticed. Graham Easton, the Foundation's head of legal compliance, was a quieter threat. Bookish, careful. The kind of man who never raised his voice but could unravel someone's career with a single audit report. He rarely spoke to Emily directly, but she caught him reviewing her access logs more than once. Aaron warned her about him. "Easton doesn't take sides," he said. "He takes control. If he senses a crack, he'll exploit it. Not to protect Brandon, to protect the system." But it wasn't all cold stares and silent threats. There were unexpected complications. People who made Emily question whether every enemy wore a mask. One of them was Elena Ruiz, Brandon's new executive assistant. She was young, bright, and unnervingly efficient. But she also had the look of someone constantly biting her tongue. Emily had noticed it early, the way Elena flinched when Brandon raised his voice, how she kept a notebook filled with things she never typed into the official record. One afternoon, as Emily passed by the copy room, she saw Elena sitting alone, shoulders hunched, wiping mascara from her cheek. Emily paused. "You okay?" Elena nodded too quickly. "Allergies." Emily didn't push, but she left her a note later that day. "You don't owe him silence." Nothing happened for 2 weeks. Then, without warning, Elena forwarded her a chain of emails, internal memos between Brandon and Victoria, detailing strategic financial diversions and offshore restructuring methods. It was enough to trigger a formal review by Aaron's task force, but it also meant Emily was no longer invisible. Brandon summoned her the next morning. She walked into his office, the same office where he once kissed her hand after every board meeting, like a king addressing his queen. He looked up, surprised. "Have we met before?" Emily's stomach twisted, not from fear, but fury. She smiled. "Not officially." He tilted his head. "What's your name again?" "Whitaker," she said. "Anna Whitaker." His smile faltered, just for a second. And that was all she needed. From that moment on, the game changed. No more passive observation. No more quiet infiltration. Now, it was a war of subtle attacks and disguised moves. And Emily wasn't just surviving it. She was winning. It was never meant to be romantic. Their alliance had rules, boundaries, purpose. Aaron was tactical, always a few steps ahead, measured in his movements, deliberate in his words. Emily was composed, armored, focused. Both knew this wasn't the time for emotion. They had too much at stake, too much to prove, too many ghosts circling. And yet, there were moments, small ones, quiet ones, like the night Emily showed up at Aaron's office, soaked from the rain, eyes sharp but exhausted. He looked up from his desk. "You're drenched." "I'm aware." He stood, crossed the room and handed her a towel, one he kept for field work, but she didn't ask. She took it, grateful, and began drying her hair. "I need access to the offshore transaction list from 2019, she said, voice tight. "I think the trail goes deeper than we thought." Aaron didn't answer right away. Instead, he watched her, her hands trembling slightly, her breath uneven, her voice pushing past the exhaustion like it was a wall she refused to acknowledge. "You're burning out," he said. "I don't have time to burn out." He hesitated, then added gently, "You're not alone in this." Emily froze. That word again. Alone. It used to be a fact. Now it felt like a choice. She sat down in the chair across from him, towel still wrapped around her shoulders. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted. "Not just the revenge, not just the fight. I mean, trusting someone, letting anyone in." He leaned forward, elbows on the desk. "Then let me say something, and you don't have to respond." She looked at him. "I don't care about your last name. I don't care about the scandal. I don't care about how many times you've been broken. I care that you're still standing." Emily blinked. Slowly. The room felt smaller, warmer, not dangerous, but unfamiliar. "Why me?" she whispered. Aaron's voice was steady. "Because the first time I saw you, you were telling a room full of billionaires that your company would never sacrifice its values. And the second time I saw you, you were being erased. And still, you never flinched." Silence settled between them like a truth they weren't ready to say out loud. Later that night, after hours of cross-referencing documents and planning the next phase of exposure, Emily stood by the door, ready to leave. She paused, turned back. "Thank you," she said, "for seeing me." He looked up from his notes. "I always did. That's when it happened. Not dramatic, not planned. Just a moment, when she stepped forward, unsure, and he met her halfway. Their lips touched briefly, carefully, not passion, recognition. Then she pulled back, breath shaky, eyes wide. "I shouldn't have..." "I know." She left without another word, and for hours after, Aaron sat in silence, not because he regretted the kiss, but because he finally realized what he'd be willing to lose to protect her. The kiss should have complicated things. It didn't. Not at first. Emily and Aaron didn't speak about it. They buried it beneath case files and legal strategy, let it dissolve into the hum of shared purpose. But something had shifted, not just between them, but around them. And Emily felt it. She noticed it in the smallest cracks, like how the internal Carter Foundation files she accessed through the secure channel suddenly began disappearing a day later, as if someone inside was tracking her movements and deleting evidence as fast as she could find it. Or how the press, which had been silent about her for months, suddenly ran a small but oddly timed article titled, "Where is Emily Carter Now? A Forgotten Heiress with Unfinished Business." No photo, no quote, just enough noise to make her visible again. Aaron denied leaking it. Emily believed him, mostly. Then came the memo. It landed in her inbox under her alias, a generic HR update about company restructuring. but embedded inside was a hidden message. A single sentence in a block of white text at the end of the document, visible only when highlighted. "You're not the only one watching. Check the file room. Drawer marked red." Emily stared at the screen for a long time. There were only 3 people who could have sent it. Elena, possibly. Graham? Maybe. But it didn't feel like them. The wording was too deliberate, too intimate. That night, she went to the basement archive of the Carter Foundation. It was after hours. No one was around. She found the red drawer. Inside, a flash drive and a photo of Erin, sitting at a bar, talking to Brandon, laughing. Her throat tightened. It could have been old. It could have been staged. It could have been nothing. But trust wasn't something she handed out lightly anymore. She took the flash drive and left. The next morning, she didn't confront Aaron. Instead, she gave him space, asked him to run background checks, requested data, kept the tone professional. He didn't question it, but she watched him. And that's when she saw something she couldn't explain. At a late-night strategy meeting, while they were reviewing encrypted financial transfers, Aaron hesitated, just for a second. Just enough for her to notice he already knew what she was about to reveal, a detail about a Cayman account that should have shocked him. He played along, but it was an act. Later that night, she checked the IP log of the drive's metadata. It had been accessed 48 hours before she found it. From a location tied to Aaron's encrypted laptop. Emily didn't sleep that night. She didn't eat the next day, but she smiled at everyone in the hallway. She took her place in meetings. She played her role perfectly, because now she knew something was wrong, not just inside the Carter Foundation, but inside her plan, inside the man standing beside her. And if she was wrong, she would lose the one person who saw her clearly. But if she was right, then she wasn't just fighting Brandon. She was sleeping beside another enemy. It was strange, the way attraction grew in silence. Between Emily and Aaron, there were no grand gestures, no whispered confessions in moonlight. But there were moments, potent, charged, suspended between instinct and hesitation. They worked side by side for hours, shared quiet meals in conference rooms, traded glances that said more than most people's arguments. They spoke in code, in irony, in unfinished thoughts. They weren't lovers. They were something more dangerous. 2 people trying not to fall for each other while holding the same loaded gun. And yet, some nights, the lines blurred. Like the evening Emily fell asleep on Aaron's couch after reviewing legal statements. She woke to find a blanket draped over her, a post-it on the table beside her that simply read, "You can rest here. No one's watching." Like the time he placed a protective hand on her back as they exited the courthouse through a crowd of reporters, subtle but grounding, and how she didn't want to step away. Or how, during a late-night debrief, she reached for a file and her hand brushed his. They both paused, but neither moved. Still, the barriers loomed. Emily couldn't forget the photo. Aaron and Brandon, together. He hadn't explained it, because she hadn't asked, and she wasn't ready to. She told herself she was waiting for proof, but deep down, she was afraid of the answer. One evening, they sat together at a small table in a hidden cafe Aaron had introduced her to, a place that didn't care about names or headlines, just good coffee and dim lighting. They talked about strategy, about press timelines, about court orders. Then Aaron said casually, "You ever think about what happens after?" Emily frowned. After what? This, the revenge, the company, the foundation. After you burn it all down, what's left? She hesitated. "Freedom," she said. "Maybe," he said, "but maybe it's something else." She met his eyes. Like what? He didn't answer, because in that moment, they both felt it. The weight of possibility, the shadow of betrayal, the truth they were both too afraid to say. "I want you, but I don't know if I can trust you." When she got home that night, she found an envelope under her door. No name, no return address. Inside, a single page, typed. "He knows you saw the photo. He's waiting for you to ask. And if you don't, you'll never know what he gave up to protect you." Emily sat on the edge of her bed, that note shaking in her hands, because love wasn't the barrier. It was the risk. And she wasn't sure if this time, the reward was worth the fall. To the world, Emily and Aaron looked like a perfect alliance. Strategic, efficient, composed. But beneath the rhythm of press releases and sealed court documents, something deeper had begun to pulse. a tension the audience could feel even if the characters couldn't fully see it yet. It began with the missing file. Emily had flagged a suspicious transaction linked to an offshore trust Brandon controlled, a transfer that occurred days before her public ousting. She had bookmarked the document, cross-referenced it, prepared to bring it to Aaron, but when she returned to the drive, it was gone, vanished. At first, she assumed a glitch, but the metadata proved otherwise. Someone had accessed her folder at 2:14 a.m. Only 3 people had clearance. Aaron was one of them. She didn't mention it. Neither did he. Later that week, Aaron received a manila envelope at his office. No return address, just a photo and a note. The photo showed Emily, at a cafe, speaking to Elena Ruiz, Brandon's assistant. The note read, "How sure are you she's not playing both sides?" He crumpled it and threw it away, but the damage was done. The audience sees him hesitate the next time Emily speaks. Just for a second. Enough. Meanwhile, Emily notices something else. A man at the corner of a press event, camera pointed at her. Not one of the foundation's photographers. She watches him. He never approaches, but he clicks 5 times in less than 10 seconds. She memorizes his face. 3 days later, she sees him again, outside Aaron's apartment, not watching the building, watching her. She says nothing, but now, she watches Aaron differently, subtly, carefully, not with suspicion, not yet, but with restraint. The audience sees her hesitate when he reaches for her hand at the elevator, how her body stiffens before relaxing, how her smile takes a breath longer to form. Then come the phone calls. Anonymous. Silent. She answers once. A voice, disguised, genderless, whispers, "You trust him too much." Click. The next time she records it. Runs the number through a secure trace. It's a disposable line tied to a burner phone, purchased 2 blocks from the Carter Foundation. It's not proof, but it's enough to raise every alarm she's been ignoring. Still, she tells no one, because she's been here before, with Brandon, with the board, with her own silence. She's not ready to accuse the only person who ever made her feel safe in the fire. But now, the audience knows. She's not safe. Not fully. The biggest clue comes when Aaron receives a classified document through his private DOJ contact, a leaked memo about Mira Holdings, one of Brandon's offshoot corporations used to launder campaign donations. Aaron claims he just got it, but 2 episodes ago we saw him hesitate over a folder marked Mira. The timeline doesn't match. He's hiding something. Why? That's the question neither Emily nor the audience can yet answer. And so, the watchers, us, begin to feel the storm before the characters do. Because trust, in this world, isn't a feeling. It's a countdown. Trust isn't just a choice. It's a currency. And in Emily's world, it was quickly becoming dangerously scarce. The first fracture came from inside the building, in the form of Graham Easton. He called her into a conference room one morning, his tone polite, his manner cold. "I'm conducting a full audit of cross-departmental permissions," he said, tapping a folder. Standard procedure, nothing personal. But the folder on the table bore her alias, Anna Whitaker, with a stack of printed documents showing every system she'd accessed in the last 3 weeks. He slid the papers toward her. It's unusual, the volume, especially from someone with a short-term consulting role. Emily didn't blink. "Transparency is my specialty." He smiled without warmth. "I'd advise you not to be too transparent. The Foundation prefers shadows." It wasn't a warning. It was a test. And she passed, outwardly. But she knew something had changed. Graham wasn't just monitoring her. He was preparing a case. Whether for Brandon, the board, or himself, she couldn't be sure. That same afternoon, Elena Ruiz cornered her in the basement archives. "I need to talk to you," she whispered. They moved into the stairwell, out of camera range, where Elena showed her a screenshot from an internal memo. Brandon had ordered an integrity assessment of all external hires. "It's about you," she said. They know. Emily's heart didn't race. She'd expected this. But what she didn't expect was the second page Elena hesitated to show her, one labeled PR Strategy, Exposure Response. It detailed a plan for controlled scandal, leaking documents to suggest Emily had falsified her credentials under the alias Anna Whitaker. "They want to force your hand," Elena said. "Make you go public before you're ready." Emily nodded, voice low. "Then we won't give them the timeline they want." But privately, the decision cut deep. Going public meant sacrificing everything Aaron had helped her build behind the scenes. It meant shifting from silent infiltration to full exposure. It meant risking the one advantage she still had: invisibility. She took the memo to Aaron that evening. He read it, jaw tight. "You know what this means," he said. "They're cornering us. They're trying to flush you out." She met his eyes. "Then we flush first." But later that night, Emily stood alone on her apartment balcony, gripping the railing as wind howled through the dark. She thought of her parents, of what they would have done, of whether revenge had cost her too much. The next morning, she met with her legal team. One of the partners, a sharp woman named Delia Sharp, offered a reality check. "You can't wage war without casualties," she said. "Even if you win, people will believe what they want. The press will dig. You'll lose the right to vanish again." Emily sat quietly. "I'm not planning to vanish." Delia raised an eyebrow. "Good, because once we fire this shot, you'll be walking through the world as a target." Emily looked down at her hands. "So be it." But the hardest conflict came days later, when Aaron told her quietly, over coffee. "We found another name linked to the Mira Holdings funnel, a woman named Ava Blake." She frowned. "Blake?" "My sister," he said. Emily froze. Aaron looked away. "She worked in finance, got pulled into a consulting scheme years ago. I tried to protect her. It's why I started following the money trail. You never told me. I didn't know how." Now, Emily was caught, because the one person she trusted was suddenly not just a partner, but emotionally entangled with the enemy, and he hadn't told her. Her silence stretched long. Then she whispered, "Are you here for justice, Aaron, or for redemption?" He didn't answer, didn't deny it. And for the first time, Emily didn't know whose war she was really fighting anymore. The room was too quiet for what was about to happen. It was a board meeting, official, controlled. 6 men, 3 women, each sitting behind tablets and water glasses, dressed in confidence and money. Brandon Carter sat at the head, his tie perfectly knotted, smile cool, one arm draped over the back of his chair like a king entertaining peasants. Emily was seated at the far end, the consultant, the outsider, the inconvenient remnant of a legacy they thought they'd buried. The press had already begun to buzz. Word had leaked, not about her return, not yet, but about the audit, the rumors of misuse, the murmurs of betrayal. Brandon opened the meeting with charm. "Before we dive into projections, I'd like to address the narrative circulating in certain circles," he said. "Baseless accusations, fed by disgruntled parties, and old ghosts." Emily didn't flinch. She waited until he was halfway through his performance. Then she stood. She opened a leather folder and placed a single printed document on the table. "Before we continue," she said calmly, "I'd like to enter this into the record." The board members looked at one another. Brandon blinked, just once. Aaron, seated near the back, there as a legal observer under his DOJ badge, gave nothing away, not even with his eyes. "What is that?" Brandon asked, still composed. Emily turned to the group. "This is a certified copy of a Cayman bank transfer made through Mira Holdings. It directly links Carter Foundation funds to an off-the-record investment in a South African construction firm, owned by a shell company under your name." Brandon laughed. "You're reaching. I'm not done." She pulled out a second document. "This is the memo you signed authorizing Elena Ruiz to process those same funds under philanthropic pretense." Gasps. Brandon's smile cracked. Emily laid out document after document, wire transfers, internal communications, signed authorizations, dates, names, locations, and finally, a flash drive. "This contains audio files," she said. "Recordings of Victoria Hale and Brandon Carter discussing contingency strategies in case I resurfaced, including a staged leak campaign, falsified credentials, and plans to publicly discredit me in advance." Victoria stood. "That's absurd. There's no proof those voices are ours." Emily nodded. "Then you won't mind us verifying the voice prints in front of the board." The room fell into stunned silence. Then Brandon stood, fast. "You don't get to come back here and pretend you matter." Emily turned to face him fully. "I'm not pretending. I built this." His face hardened. "You were nothing but a signature. And you," she said, stepping closer, "were never supposed to last longer than my shadow." Aaron stood now, calmly. He produced a sealed envelope. As of this morning, the Department of Justice has opened a formal inquiry into the Carter Foundation's offshore activity. Mr. Carter, you're advised not to leave the state. Brandon looked at him. You set me up? Erin's voice was quiet. No, she just finally told the story. The board erupted, some in protest, some in disbelief, but none in Brandon's defense. Victoria left the room in silence. Brandon stood frozen, jaw clenched, eyes locked on Emily like she had just set fire to the world they built together. And maybe she had. But she didn't look away, because this was the moment she had dreamed of. Not the destruction, not the downfall, but the clarity, the truth, finally louder than the lies. And her voice, no longer borrowed, her own. The day after the board meeting, Emily disappeared. Not in the way she had before, not into shadows or silence, but in a quieter, more dangerous way, inward. She turned off her phone, ignored Erin's messages, declined every press request. Even Delia, her most relentless legal ally, couldn't get through. She stayed in her apartment, blinds drawn, lights off, watching the sun move across the ceiling like time passing in judgment. Because victory wasn't clean. It never was. She had exposed Brandon, unraveled his empire. The Carter Foundation was in free fall. The headlines had turned. Heiress returns, unmasked scandal, Carter legacy shattered by ex-wife's bombshell. But instead of relief, she felt hollow. Because the moment she won, she realized something far worse. She had nothing left to fight for. She had become a woman shaped entirely by war. And now that it was over, who was she? The ghost she'd silenced came roaring back. The image of her father's smile in the boardroom, her mother's voice on the porch, the last Christmas dinner before everything cracked, the moment she signed her marriage certificate believing in a partnership that never existed. She replayed Brandon's words again and again. You were nothing but a signature. And worse, the truth that stung deeper. He wasn't wrong, because she had let him. She had trusted. She had believed. She had wanted it to be real. That was the real betrayal. Not that he fooled her, that she helped him do it. That night, she sat on the floor of her living room, surrounded by empty coffee cups and shredded newspaper clippings. The flash drive with the recordings still sat on her desk. She'd listened to them a dozen times, memorized every word, every pause, every whispered plan to ruin her before she could rise. She didn't cry, she didn't scream, but her hands shook uncontrollably, not from fear, from the unbearable weight of almost losing herself, and from the quiet knowledge that she would never be the same again. At 2:14 a.m., she finally opened Erin's last message. Say something. Anything. I don't need you to be strong. I just need to know you're still there. She stared at it for a long time. She wanted to call him, but she didn't know how to ask what was burning inside her. Were you protecting me or protecting yourself? Because she hadn't forgotten the photo. She hadn't forgotten the hesitation. And now, in the aftermath, the silence between them had a shape. It wasn't distance. It was grief. Not for love lost, but for the version of themselves they both knew they could never go back to. Emily didn't return Erin's call. Not the next day, not the next 3, but on the 4th morning, she walked into the old bookstore cafe they once shared, the one with the soft jazz and overwatered ferns, and found him waiting in the far corner, exactly where she knew he would be. He stood when he saw her, cautious. She didn't speak. She sat. He waited a beat, then said, "You disappeared." I had nothing left to say. He studied her. Then say it anyway. She looked out the window. You kept things from me. He didn't deny it. My sister was part of the Mira trail, he said quietly. I didn't know how deep she was involved until it was too late. I thought, if I told you too soon, you'd question everything. You'd walk away before I had the chance to fix it. Emily's voice was low, controlled. I would have understood, but you didn't give me the choice. Erin exhaled. I didn't want to lose you. A pause. Then she whispered, then you shouldn't have lied. The weight of those words flattened the air between them. He nodded once. You're right. I don't need you to say that. I'm not saying it for you. Emily closed her eyes. When she opened them, she pulled something from her coat pocket. The burner phone that had received the anonymous texts, the warnings, the clues, the cryptic pushes toward truth. She slid it across the table. Erin stared at it. Where did you get this? It was delivered the day before the board meeting. No prints, no trace. But someone wanted me to look in the right direction. Erin's jaw tightened. It wasn't me. I know. Her voice dropped. But it was someone who knew both of us. That was the moment they both understood. They weren't alone in the game. Someone had been moving pieces just out of sight, protecting Emily from some threats, exposing others, guiding her without revealing their hand. And whoever it was, wasn't done yet. The real twist hadn't happened. Not yet. 2 days later, Graham Easton was found unconscious in his apartment. Overdose. Non-lethal. Intent unclear. The following morning, Elena Ruiz disappeared. Left no resignation. No final message. Her apartment was empty, but Emily found something taped to the inside of the medicine cabinet. A photo of her and Aaron, taken through a window, dated 3 weeks prior. She brought it to Aaron in person. He stared at it, silent, then said, "We're not in control anymore." Emily shook her head. Maybe we never were. That night, the final piece dropped. A USB drive arrived at Emily's door. Inside, an audio file, unmarked. She played it. At first, static. Then, Brandon's voice, low, confessional. "If she ever finds out what I did to her father, it's over. I can control the board, the press, even the courts. But not her. She was never supposed to find out." Click. Silence. Emily's breath caught, because her father's death had been ruled accidental. A car crash, mechanical failure. But now, the implication was something else, something darker. She sat still for a long time, then whispered to herself, "This isn't over." Not because of revenge, not because of legacy, but because the past, the real past, was clawing its way back. And for the first time, she wasn't sure if she had destroyed the monster or uncovered a deeper one. It wasn't the headlines that broke her. It wasn't the press dissecting her every move. Emily Carter, heroine or hysteric, heiress or hunter, nor the leaked articles hinting at her mental health, her time in hiding, her mysterious relationship with a federal agent. It wasn't the whisper campaigns from Brandon's remaining allies, or the angry emails from Whitaker shareholders demanding she restore the family name with dignity. It was the silence, the brutal empty silence after the tape. Because that voice, Brandon's, speaking so plainly about her father, it shook something loose inside her that no courtroom victory could quiet. She barely left her apartment. The lights stayed off, the curtains closed, dishes piled in the sink. Her laptop sat untouched on the table, next to a single yellow rose that had arrived without a note. She didn't care where it came from. She didn't care if it was a warning, a threat, a memory. She just didn't care. Emily had spent the last year building a fortress, brick by brick, strategy by strategy. She'd armored herself in law, revenge, composure. But grief? Grief doesn't respect fortresses. It seeps through the cracks. She dreamed of her father, of the way he used to read the financial pages at the breakfast table, still wearing his old flannel robe, of how he once told her, "People will forget what you earned, but not how you carried it." She remembered that the day of his funeral. She remembered how Brandon had held her hand too tightly in front of the cameras. She remembered how quickly he'd claimed control of the estate. And now, she couldn't remember whether she had mourned properly, or just performed it. The world was still spinning. The investigation was still moving. Aaron was still sending updates, quietly, respectfully, knowing she wouldn't reply. But for Emily, everything had paused, until the call came. Private number. She almost didn't answer. When she did, the voice on the line was heavily distorted, masked. But the words were clear. "Your father's accident wasn't mechanical failure. The brake line was cut. The mechanic was paid. Look deeper." Click. No trace. No ID. But it was enough. Emily stood in the center of her apartment for a long time. Then she moved, methodically, showered, dressed, tied her hair back. She pulled the USB drive from the drawer, slid it into a hidden pocket, and left. Not to see Aaron, not to call her legal team, but to return to the one place she had avoided since the beginning, her childhood home. The Whitaker estate had been closed since her disappearance, the staff dismissed, the grounds overgrown, but the security system still recognized her fingerprint. She stepped through the front door into dust and memory. The living room looked exactly as it had the night before her father died. Chessboard still set mid-game, fireplace logs untouched. She walked slowly, deliberately, until she reached her father's private study. The door had been locked. She still had the key. Inside, It smelled of old paper and wood polish. The air was still, sacred. She stood behind the desk where he once taught her to read ledgers to build empires, and she opened the bottom drawer. Inside, wrapped in a silk cloth, was a notebook, her father's private ledger. She flipped through it, hands trembling. Page after page of observations, business notes, political connections, and then a final entry, dated 2 days before the accident. Brandon approached me today, offered to streamline the estate transition. Told him no. Felt like a threat. Must prepare Emily. She's not ready yet, but she's smarter than he thinks. The ink was smudged, but it was enough. Proof? No. But intention? Yes. And in that moment, Emily understood something more chilling than any betrayal. Her father had known, and he had died trying to protect her from the truth. The city felt different when Emily returned from the estate. Sharper, louder, colder. She walked the streets like someone reawakened, carrying her father's notebook close to her body, as if it might vanish if she blinked. She wasn't crying. She wasn't unraveling, but something inside her had hardened, not out of vengeance, but out of clarity. Now she wasn't searching for justice. She was chasing the truth, and truth didn't care who it shattered. Back in her apartment, she spread the notebook pages across the kitchen table, highlighted names, dated meetings, cross-referenced notes with transaction logs Aaron had sent her weeks ago. It all aligned: timelines, financial patterns, phone records. Brandon hadn't just exploited her. He had manipulated her father, positioned himself as successor, quietly gathered influence with board members, arranged for the estate's power of attorney to be temporarily reassigned due to grieving stress. And now there was motive, intent, almost enough for murder. Almost. That night, she met with Aaron in a secure cafe uptown. No phones, no laptops, just conversation. He hadn't seen her in days. "You look," he hesitated, "different." I found my father's private notes. His eyes sharpened. And he was afraid of Brandon. He wrote that Brandon threatened him 2 days before the crash. Aaron inhaled slowly. "That's not enough for the DA." "I know," she said, "but it's enough for me." A silence passed between them. Then Aaron said, "I have something too. Something I haven't shown you yet." He pulled out an envelope, slid it across the table. Emily opened it. Photos. Not just Brandon, but Victoria Hale, with a man she didn't recognize, exchanging something, a briefcase perhaps, outside a private airstrip. "There's no timestamp," Emily said. "There is," Aaron replied. "It was taken the day before your father's crash." Emily's heart skipped. "Who is he?" "Interpol thinks he's a fixer. Cleanup jobs, payments, disappearances." A pause. "You think they paid him?" "I think it's time we stopped calling this an accident." Before Emily could respond, the waitress delivered 2 glasses of water, but her hands trembled slightly. She looked pale, nervous. She left quickly. Emily and Aaron exchanged a glance. Emily reached for her glass, but paused. Aaron did the same. Then he whispered, "Don't drink it." They stood up immediately, leaving cash on the table. Outside, they turned a corner and ducked into an alley. Aaron spoke low. "We're not invisible anymore. Someone's getting nervous." "No," he said. "Someone's getting ready." That night, Emily returned home and found her apartment door slightly ajar. She drew in a sharp breath. Everything inside was untouched. Nothing stolen. Nothing broken. Except one thing. The yellow rose on her table was gone. And in its place, a single chess piece. The queen, lying on its side. She picked it up slowly, her breath shallow. On the bottom, someone had carved a message. "Your move." The next morning, Emily didn't flinch. Not when she opened her eyes and saw the queen piece on the nightstand. Not when she stepped over the spot where her door had been slightly open the night before. Not even when her email flooded with new threats. Anonymous messages that read like riddles. Kings fall. Queens burn. Silence is no longer your shield. One father down. Who's next? She didn't delete them. She archived them. Indexed them. She was done hiding. Emily changed her phone number. Updated her digital security protocols. Hired a forensic analyst to trace every backdoor breach in her system. Moved into a secured residence under federal protection. Coordinated quietly by Aaron. But she did it all without fear. Because something had shifted. Not just her posture, not just her tone, but her foundation. She no longer saw herself as a woman rebuilding what was lost. Now, she was a woman building what never existed, a version of herself that didn't ask permission to lead, to question, to destroy if necessary. Delia Sharp noticed the difference first. "You used to ask what the law would allow," she said, reviewing their next legal maneuver. Emily met her eyes. "Now I ask what the truth will expose." The plan changed. No more careful releases. No more strategic leaks. Now, full transparency. Emily called a press conference, not at the Carter Foundation, at the Whitaker estate. The gates opened for the first time in a year. Media lined the lawn. Drones circled above. She walked to the podium wearing a gray suit, her mother's, and a steel gaze. No teleprompter, no prepared speech, just her voice. "I was called weak, broken, silent. They said I disappeared, that I ran, that I was ashamed. But the truth is, I survived. I rebuilt. I returned not for revenge, but for clarity. My name is Emily Whitaker Carter, and this is where the story begins. Not with scandal, but with truth." She released the audio recording of Brandon confessing fear about her father. She shared documents from her father's private notebook. She announced a civil case for wrongful death and corporate conspiracy. She didn't ask for belief. She dared them to deny her. In the days that followed, everything exploded. Victoria Hale resigned. Interpol opened an official investigation. The fixer in the photograph was arrested in Zurich. Elena Ruiz reappeared, through a pre-recorded video uploaded to a whistleblower site. In it, she confirmed internal discussions about eliminating obstacles to succession, including Thomas Whitaker, including Emily. Emily watched the video once, then called Delia. "It's time." They filed the suit, but Emily didn't stop there. She returned to the Carter Foundation headquarters unannounced, walked through the glass doors in front of cameras, ascended to the executive floor, and handed Brandon Carter an envelope. He opened it. Inside, a personal letter. One sentence. "You once told me I was just a signature. Watch what happens when the hand holding the pen stops shaking." He looked up. Her expression was unreadable. He opened his mouth. She turned and walked away. Because now, it wasn't about him. It never really was. It was about reclaiming her name, her story, her power. Not through erasure, but through fire. And she wasn't done burning. The courthouse was a modern glass fortress, all symmetry and silence. Emily walked through its front steps wearing navy blue. No security detail, no entourage, just her. Alone, as she had been when she first fell. But now, she didn't move like someone who needed protection. She moved like someone who had already survived the worst and wasn't afraid of what came next. Inside, the courtroom buzzed. Brandon Carter sat at the defendant's table, perfectly dressed, surrounded by a small army of attorneys. He looked the same. That was the most infuriating part. Like everything he'd done hadn't touched him, but Emily saw it. The slight tension in his jaw, the way his left foot tapped under the table, just once. Aaron sat quietly behind her, in the gallery. He hadn't spoken to her since the press conference, not because of anger, but because there were no more apologies left to make, and no more distractions to offer. This wasn't about them. Not now. The judge called the hearing to order. Emily rose with her legal team. This wasn't the trial yet. It was the motion to proceed. The day Brandon's lawyers had been sure they'd walk away clean, citing lack of direct evidence, claiming character defamation, media manipulation, and emotional instability. But Emily was ready. Delia Sharp began with a slow, surgical takedown of the timeline. Then came the documents, bank transfers, emails, photographs. Then Elena's video testimony. Then the fixer's arrest record, logged the day before her father's crash. Then finally, her father's journal, presented under seal and corroborated by handwriting analysis. When Delia rested, the courtroom was silent. Brandon stood to respond. His voice was cool, calculated. "My ex-wife is seeking emotional closure through legal theater." He smiled. Emily didn't. She stood before the judge. "I don't want closure," she said. "I want accountability." Then she turned to Brandon. "You lied to the world. But more than that, you lied to me. You told me I was fragile. You tried to convince me I was the one breaking things, when all along you were the wreckage." He shifted in his seat. The judge allowed her to continue. She raised the chess piece from her pocket, the queen. held it up. Every move you made was calculated. Every piece you played was disposable. But you forgot one thing. She placed it on the railing. I was never the pawn. Brandon didn't smile anymore. The judge set the trial date. As they exited, cameras swarmed. Microphones and faces. Ms. Carter, do you think you'll win? Emily paused, then looked directly at the reporters. I already did. The trial began on a Monday. The courtroom was packed. Media, investors, silent enemies in tailored suits. And behind them, ghosts. Shareholders of Whitaker Global, old allies of Emily's father, faces from her past life who had once looked through her like glass. But now, they watched her. Not with pity, with respect. Brandon Carter arrived each day with a rotation of high-powered lawyers, stylists, and PR strategists. His opening statement was a performance, all wounded charm and legal theatrics. She is a grieving woman, not a criminal investigator. What we see here is the weaponization of emotion against logic. Emily didn't flinch. She didn't need to defend her emotions. She had facts. Aaron was called to testify. He walked to the stand in full DOJ uniform. Precise, composed. He recounted the original investigation, the flagged shell corporations, the photos, the surveillance. The defense pushed hard. Mr. Blake, are you personally involved with the plaintiff? Aaron paused, then answered without blinking. Yes. The courtroom murmured. The lawyer smiled. So your testimony may be compromised? Aaron looked at Emily, then back to the jury. No, because what I feel for her has nothing to do with the truth she uncovered. I didn't protect her. She exposed this alone. I just followed the trail she blazed. Emily's throat tightened. Not from shame, not from doubt, from vindication. Later that day, Victoria Hale was called. She looked older, tired, stripped of her polished armor. She pled the fifth on half the questions. On the rest, she stumbled. But then came the twist no one saw coming. The defense called their final surprise witness, Elena Ruiz. She entered the courtroom flanked by federal marshals, no longer in hiding, no longer a secretary. On the stand, her voice trembled only once. I was instructed by Mr. Carter to manage certain financial redirections. I was told they were routine, but when I asked questions, I was warned not to interfere. Later, I overheard him discussing Ms. Carter's father. The phrase used was, "Make sure he never signs anything again." The courtroom gasped. The defense objected, but it was too late. The phrase hit like a hammer. The judge overruled. Elena handed over a printed transcript of a deleted voicemail she had saved, left by Brandon to Victoria Hale 2 nights before Thomas Whitaker's crash. If he won't sign the transition, then we do what we have to. I'm done waiting. This ends now. There it was. Intent. Not just for fraud, but for murder. Brandon's team scrambled, filed emergency motions, but the case had shifted, irreversibly. The courtroom became a war zone of sealed exhibits, forensic accountants, digital forensics. Every move Brandon had made, every asset funneled, every lie told, all exposed. Emily didn't celebrate. She sat still until the final ruling was issued. The court finds sufficient evidence to proceed with formal criminal charges for conspiracy to defraud, financial misconduct, and intentional obstruction of a state law. The wrongful death case will proceed to federal review. Brandon didn't look at her when they took him away, but Emily looked at him, not in triumph, in stillness. Because justice doesn't always feel like victory. Sometimes it feels like silence. Sometimes it feels like being left alone with what's true. But for the first time in years, Emily could breathe. It was over. Not the grief, not the loss, but the war. Brandon Carter was in custody. The Carter Foundation had frozen all major assets. Investigations stretched across 3 countries. Emily's name, once smeared across tabloids and boardrooms, now carried weight. Not just legacy, authority, but peace. That was harder. She stood alone in her father's study. The trial had ended 3 days earlier. The air was still heavy with dust and memory. The sun filtered through the curtains in golden threads, landing on the chessboard they never finished. The queen was back in place now, upright, silent. Aaron arrived just after noon. He didn't call ahead. He didn't knock. Emily opened the door before he reached it. They stood face to face for a long time. He was different, not visibly, but the armor was gone. He looked tired, honest. She gestured for him to come in. They sat across from each other just like before. No folders, no files, only space, and everything between them. Aaron broke the silence. I thought this would feel like victory. Emily nodded. So did I. He reached into his jacket and pulled out something small, a pawn piece, carved from dark wood. I found it in my desk, he said. From your father's set. She took it slowly. He always said pawns are underestimated, she murmured. But they're the only ones who can transform. Aaron's voice softened. You transformed everything. She looked at him, and finally asked the question that had lingered between them since the beginning. Why did you really stay? He didn't blink. Because I believed you when no one else did. And because I knew, if I let you fall, I'd lose something I couldn't replace. She swallowed hard. You hurt me. I know. I needed you. I'm still here. Her voice broke. I don't know what we are anymore. He reached across the table. Not for her hand. For the queen. He set it beside the pawn. You don't have to know. Not yet. She looked at the pieces. Then at him. Then for the first time in weeks. Maybe months. She let herself cry. Not from pain. From release. He stood. Moved to her side. Knelt beside her. Held her. No promises. No demands. Just warmth. They stayed that way until the light outside faded to blue. Eventually she whispered, "Stay." And he did. Not because she needed him, but because she finally wanted to be held by someone who had seen every broken part of her, and stayed anyway. In the months that followed, Emily Carter stopped being a headline. The media moved on, as it always does, to newer scandals, younger faces, louder stories. But in quiet corners of legal circles, she became a case study. In boardrooms, a cautionary tale. In whispered conversations among heiresses and daughters of empire, a symbol. But Emily didn't care for symbols anymore. She rebuilt Whitaker Global, not into what it was, into what it should have been. Smaller, cleaner, with a mission rooted in ethics, sustainability, and legacy. The board was reshaped. Every shareholder meeting began with a moment of silence for Thomas and Margaret Whitaker, not because they were gone, but because they were the reason. She turned the estate's West Wing into a foundation for young women pursuing law and engineering. She didn't attach her name to it. But the plaque outside read, "For those who've been told to stay silent, speak louder." Her story became something more than scandal. It became a blueprint. She still saw Aaron. Not every day, not perfectly, but honestly. They didn't rush into labels. They took walks, read books in silence, shared space without expectation. Because some loves aren't built in romance. They're built in battle, forged in truth, tested in fire, and survived. One evening, sitting under the garden lights of her childhood home, Aaron asked her, "If none of this had happened, do you think we would have found each other?" Emily didn't answer right away. She looked up at the stars, then whispered, "No, but I wouldn't trade it." And that was the lesson, that sometimes we don't rise because we're ready. We rise because we've been pushed to the edge and choose not to fall. We rise because the world tried to erase us, and we made that silence echo. We rise not as the wife they chose, but as the woman they never saw coming. A quiet morning, Emily walks alone through the old chess room. She stops at the table, places two pieces on the board, the queen and the pawn. Then, slowly, she sets them side by side, turns, walks away. As the camera lingers, a soft breeze moves through the open window. The chessboard remains, but now it belongs to no one but her. Final phrase on screen. She was never just the wife. She was the one who rewrote the rules of the game. Your heart knows the way. Subscribe and follow the beauty.